let's begin this section with the state of free speech at universities. Josh, this is a subject you're very interested in.
It is indeed, after reading your wonderful, very thin book.
That's what I was hoping you'd do, with plug the book.
There we are.
Thank you.
And your new book as well, which I'm really enjoying at the moment. Anyway, so Conservative students unable to openly talk about their views on campus. This is a study, more than two-thirds of undergraduates who say they would vote Tory, reluctant to express their opinions. Now, you sort of would somewhat expect that a little bit. Like, traditionally, universities are seen as a sort of left-wing environment. Mm-hmm. It isn't a good thing, obviously, but actually, when you read a bit more into it, it's actually those with left-wing views are also increasingly fearful of expressing their opinions.
Not to the same extent.
Not to the same extent.
I'd say like a third of left-wing students are saying that, which is still double what it was a few years ago.
Yeah, which is not a good direction we're moving in. You could argue that the toxicity of the online debates have made people feel in real life maybe we just stay out of this stuff.
Does it just mean that any view that you express, people will react with hostility? You know, even though
you should see my Twitter feed after the show.
I have seen your Twitter feed.
It's painful.
Terry, do you think there's a particular problem with, you know, Conservatives, if they do express their views? You know, they're seen very as unfashionable, unpopular, so they just keep it to themselves, and then all the polls are wrong because no one wants to admit that they... You know.
We keep being wrong about... And even with... the turnout we saw after the Queen's death, I think it surprised a lot of people because we don't hear royalists very much. They don't express themselves. And
do you watch GBNews, mate?
Except on GBNews. I mean, generally not. And so I think, yes, we keep getting we don't have a very good understanding of how people feel around us. But it's good for you to be able to take opinions that you don't agree with and be able to discuss them. I think it's a shame. And I also think because free speech is one of the few things left that are free, and we should be able to enjoy it. But I tell you, there's one interesting thing about this is that this is Professor Bobby Duffy, who was in charge of this. Bobby. He's the director of the Policy Institute at the King's College in London. He said we can't divorce these trends in universities from changes in wider society, where we've seen increasing focus on cultural issues which influence student opinions. So the part of what's going on is, for a while now, we've been hearing about right-wing views not being accepted in university. Now the more extreme left-wing views are getting unpopular as well, because what we're seeing is a change in ideology. But also a lot of students are upset about this. They're upset about what's going on in the outside world, the wider world, because university students above them have moved out into that wider world and started spreading ideologies.
So this is a problem.
So they're now the new generation coming through.
So ideology is the problem, and intolerance is the problem. You know,
intolerance.
If we could just have a situation where, you know, I remember being back at university, we used to disagree and argue all the time, and that was part of the fun of it. We'd stay up all night.
Well, you're finding your position by arguing. That's how you refine your thoughts. But the other statistic here, and they present this in the Telegraph as a good thing. They go, free speech well protected at universities, and they say this because 65% of students surveyed this year said that free speech and robust debate were well protected at their institution. That's a terrible... Only 65% of students still...
Well, there's also... I mean, whenever you see these surveys, sometimes I despair. There was one last year which talked about... It was roughly a quarter, I think it was roughly 25% of students, in America this was, claimed that it was OK to resort to physical violence if people expressed extreme views. Now, the problem with that as well, leaving aside the fact that physical violence is always wrong, but also what people consider extreme views now are often actually very mainstream views that the vast majority of people hold. If people believe that there is a biological difference between men and women, that's now seen as a form of extremism and could be legitimately...
Well, they say a similar thing here where they talk about, like, people with conservative views, but what exactly...
What do they mean?
They're not saying, let's say, voting Tory. They say they could mean exactly that. A conservative view is you think sex is binary.
Yeah, which is not a conservative view.
No, exactly. And it's interesting now how there has been this, this sort of devolving between left and right, between these... Some issues have sort of somehow taken over from
I suppose evolution's quite conservative, quite old-fashioned. It's been going on for ages.
It's been working for a while.
You're such squares, man. Yeah, get with the programme.